Okay.
Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Ryan Cooper.
And I'm the Lexi the Greek. And Spross just talked over Cooper. Let's do it again.
That's fine. No, we'll this is a good point to introduce our guest, Jeff Spross, the world's best radio man.
You had one job, Spross. One job.
I was so excited. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure it heard me, and it's hearing me. Hi, everyone. Ryan, I assume you can edit me out talking over everyone at the very beginning there.
I could, but I won't.
It's more fun not to. And we'll do it live. Mean. That's my Bill O'Reilly impression. And Spross, who are you again? Tell us what you do.
So my name is Jeff Spross. I am the business and economics correspondent at The Week, so one of Ryan's colleagues there at that particular publication. And I guess I am a member of the angry quasi dirtbag left at this point. I don't know where I fall.
I love that. Don't let others define you, okay, Jeff? Don't let others. I
don't know. I'm 37. They can define me how they want. I don't care anymore. I'm too old.
That's beautiful.
I'm just going to drink my bourbon.
I love it. Well, welcome back, everybody, and we have our wonderful guest back, return appearance, Jeff Spross. I think this is our first return appearance, is it not, Goops?
That's right. Yeah, Jeff's the record holder at this point.
And we have Jeff back for a second time, not just because of his beautiful voice, which we discussed at length last time, and not just because of his expertise, but because a burning question at hand for all of us that Spross would like to discuss with us is the topic of immigration. And we have the migrant caravan and the unfortunate right-wing response to it fostered by Donald Trump and his racist populist rhetoric. But just broadly, we thought it would be good to situate discussions of immigration, asylum in the context of policy and leftist ideology and try to figure out how to think through a proper way to adjudicate these questions of, what is the proper leftist position on borders, immigration, how many immigrants, is there a limit? How do we think through the policy questions? What are the salient factors that go into how you address immigration policy? What is the distinction for refugees and those seeking asylum? And above all, just how do we respond when the right has a very clear, cohesive, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee populist message in a way that resonates intellectually and emotionally with others. So that's just a broad overview. There's a lot of ways we can go with it, and we're just going to dive in and do it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Coops if you have anything to add before we interrogate our good friend on this issue.
I think to maybe start things off, I think I will make the arguable but I think correct assertion that the United States is more hospitable to immigrants than most countries, and probably I would say probably virtually all countries, and that's despite the fact that Trump is obviously whipping up tons of anti-immigrant fear, and there is a lot of genuine hostility towards immigrants amongst the rest of the population, and there kind of always has been for a long time. But the thing about the United States that is very different from most European countries especially is that, the cliche is we're a nation of immigrants. That's true and not true, or it's kind of also a nation of we stole all the land and killed everyone who lived here before. But
I'm Greek.
As a matter,
your ancestors did it, Coops, not mine. You did it. It wasn't me.
You're only half Greek.
I'm first no, listen to this, motherfucker. My mom immigrated, and my father was, granted he was adopted, but his father immigrated from Turkey as a Greek after the genocide of the Greeks and Armenians in Smyrna. So don't give me that shit. I'm legit.
Well, my ancestry dead ends in the back hills of Kentucky, so we don't even know what atrocities they've committed. They're probably bad, but we'll never find out. Nevertheless, like the vast majority of people who live in this country as a descriptive matter are descended from immigrants. Some of them quite recent. All four of Donald Trump's grandparents were born in another country.
Experiences pro-immigrant sympathies. That explains that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's also a very common thing of the recent immigrant people who want to pull up the ladder basically and prevent other people from taking advantage of the same opportunity that they did. But yeah, African Americans were forcibly immigrated from other places, and like the big panic recently over Latinos. I think the way that the right has framed this is that, look at these people. They're not like the rest of Americans. They're not like, previous generations of immigrants from Germany or Ireland or whatever, or England. They don't, a lot of them don't speak English, blah, blah, blah. And that's total bullshit. And the fact is, like, Latinos are probably more naturally acculturated to the United States than most previous waves of immigrants, because America is already very heavily Latino. Because, for one thing, we literally stole half of Mexico back in 1848, and Latino culture has penetrated very deeply into this country. There's Mexican restaurant in every city and town and across the country. Spanish is de facto second language in maybe 40-50% of the land. And, it's just very familiar. And so I think that what the sort of starting implication I would like to begin with is that if it weren't for right-wing propaganda, that's obviously a big if, I don't think there would be all that much worry about immigrants coming in, like I don't think it would be this, and certainly in some places there would be, where there's like very concentrated flows. And I guess we'll talk about that later, but I don't think that there would be really a lot of terrible panic over this sort of stuff. It's being whipped up like sort of out of nothing, imaginary stuff.
What are you saying? There's like a 24-hour... This is crazy. Are you saying there's like a 24-hour news network that like makes money just off of propping up irrational, emotional fears in people? This is nuts. What are you talking about?
Yeah. The caravan is off the front pages. Even Trump's not talking about it anymore. That's
strange.
Not even the first caravan this year. I believe it was like the third one.
What could explain that? I don't get it.
So is this where we interject?
Go ahead.
Dive in, baby.
Okay. I have a partial disagreement with Ryan here, which is that I think
it's not allowed.
There we go.
Okay,
I think the immigration panic is kind of a feedback loop between the right-wing propaganda machine and like some underlying structural realities. The main structural reality being that the country is brutally unequal. We've had stagnating wages for decades. And we've had a very, also again, the right-wing propaganda machine, we've had a very successful ideological effort to cast scarcity as an overwhelming problem within the American political economy, right? Which is ridiculous. GDP per capita in this country is like around $60,000. At this point, that's per capita. That's like for every man, woman, and child, there is like $60,000 lying around, which is insane. That's an insane level of wealth. Like the idea that we are suffering from scarcity is bananas. But precisely because of inequality, and the extraction of wealth from the working class by like the ownership class, et cetera, people experience scarcity, and they really do, because like all their ability to like participate in the economy is being taken away from them through like the fact that like all the money that represents the labor and the wealth they create is getting sucked off to Wall Street and all the rest of it. So they're genuinely experiencing scarcity, and I think that creates an environment where it is very, very easy to demonize to demonize another, like immigrants being like a very, very convenient target. I think you saw this in Britain. This is what caused Brexit, the whole aftermath of British austerity following 2008 crash. This is what you saw across Europe. Like, I mean, I know Ryan has read Adam Tooze's history of the financial crisis. I'm reading it right now. It is astonishing, the sheer level of destructive stupidity with which the fiscal and monetary policy of the European Union was run. It is gobsmacking.
Is it stupid or is it purposeful?
Yeah, like, of course they freaked out, and because like, you know, the ideological apparatus prevents us from saying, well, maybe we should, like, you know, try something akin to socialism, or at least move in that direction. I mean, we've discussed Polanyi and all the rest of it I know you guys have discussed Polanyi previously. So like all of that energy gets shunted into, you know, the hegemonic ethno-state, or like something akin to that, which is like why we start like kicking the crap out of immigrants. So I'll start with that. I think it's a feedback loop. I think there's a real underlying structural reality that doesn't have anything to do with like immigration being like a naturally an inherently destabilizing force, and we can discuss whether or not it is or could be under some circumstances. But I don't think that's what's going on right now. What it is like, you know, we have an underlying political economic reality that is like, and the energy from that is having to get shunted into this anti-immigrant fiasco.
Right. So to both your points, I guess maybe this is something to take up. I think Jeff makes a very good point, which I think fits with Cooper's point, which is that like whatever the actual issue that is like objectively worth debating in terms of how proper immigration policy should be adjudicated and you know, understood. That has nothing to do with the political framing and discussion of immigration and refugees and so forth, which is totally bound up with the narrative of the right that has taken advantage of these structural problems of neoliberalism, causing at least the perception of scarcity, the perception of inequality, and any number of things that we can talk about that forces the citizens of this country to find meaning in blaming out groups for the economy and their situation, their lack of agency, their lack of success, et cetera, et cetera. And so like the ways in which Trump and others can capitalize on people being upset over their economic precarity feeds into a type of political discourse on immigration that has very little to do with what actually, you know, relates to the well-being of the country and what our proper policy apart from that should be. Right.
Yeah. Ryan, did you want to? I have more thoughts.
This is Ryan's turn. Yeah. Jump in, Ryan.
You go ahead, Jeff. If you got, okay, I can do some stuff. But go
right.
Ahead.
Well, yeah. So one of the things we like, some of the stuff we passed around before doing this was some stuff Reihan Salam has written a new book, basically kind of making a the pro-immigrant case for tougher borders and like less immigration. Just basically his argument is like, I mean, I think the way to characterize is like, you know, we aren't doing a good job assimilating immigrants right now, so we need to like cut way back on the amount we're bringing in until we get our shit sorted. And Reihan Salam talked to Ezra Klein on this podcast. Francis Fukuyama actually talked to Ezra Klein not too long ago, and they also talked about immigration. And
good old Francis, we love Francis. And let's call him Frank. Can we call him Frank?
Both Fukuyama and am I even pronouncing his name rightly? Fukuyama? I don't know.
Fukuyama, I think, is correct.
Okay, so Fukuyama and Salam, I think, both converge on this argument that basically, like, you know, something like the Gang of Eight compromise is what's necessary, right? Like the Gang of Eight is what could solve this. Like we give amnesty to everybody here because like that's just like acknowledging reality, and we don't really have any other options that are viable besides doing that. And the thing you give the conservatives in exchange for that is much tougher border enforcement and tighter immigration controls going forward. And Klein's response, certainly to Fukuyama, was like, I don't really think that's what's going on. And I think Klein is right in that, like, the idea that there is some centrist compromise to be had on immigration is a fantasy, because it's like we're dealing with a kind of atavistic, like, right-wing, like, ethnic identity thing, right? Like,
the thing about that we already tried that.
Right,
Obama
exactly. This is why it
massive,
failed. Right. This is why the Gang of Eight failed.
Yes.
Is that it misses, like, the underlying point. And, like, where, not surprisingly, I think Ezra Klein goes off the rails is he associates this as, like, we're just having this, like, right-wing moment, right? Like,
can I just say that we have to be better than Ezra?
I mean,
does anyone
he's very handsome?
Does anyone get that
tall.
joke? Does anyone understand
better,
the joke?
No.
God damn it. God damn it, Alexei.
No one got the joke. Damn it.
Better than Ezra. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Hello, late 90s indie rock.
Look,
Is it
we're the
even
same
indie
age.
rock?
And everything.
I still don't
know.
get it.
What the hell? Oh,
Coops
God.
didn't get it. Coops knows all about music. Oh well.
Actually, I think the way to sum this up is that there is, amongst sort of quote-unquote responsible, reasonable conservatives, reformist conservatives, et cetera, that whole ball game. There is this belief that, like, there is a centrist compromise to be had on immigration, which is essentially the Gang of Eight formula of, you give amnesty to everyone who's already here, you tighten immigration going forward, you, like, jack up border enforcement, blah, 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 blah. And the reason we can't get to this compromise is because there are extremists on both sides, right? And I think this is baloney because, as we just said, like, the Gang of Eight process failed. Like, and it's also worth noting, like, we have had draconian border enforcement for a while, and it doesn't seem to register with anyone that we have draconian border enforcement. So, like, this is very much, like I said, it's kind of like an atavistic performative process that's going on here. Like, we're not like, the idea that there is a specific, like, policy ask around immigration is false. It is a misunderstanding of what is going on here. Now, the problem is that with a lot of people on the left, you get this, from the kind of, like, similar to the Trumpism is racism all the way down analysis, which is that, well, we're having this freak out because, like, ethno-nationalism is on the rise, so people just want less immigration. They don't want different people coming here, and that's that, and there's nothing else to it. And so, just to get back to what I was saying, is, like, I think that is also incorrect, because, like, what I said, what I think is driving this, or is at least providing the groundwork for the right-wing propaganda apparatus to take advantage of, is the underlying economic problems, the underlying economic inequality, labor exploitation, etc. And so, like, to fix this thing, you would need to, I mean, to fix this thing. I mean, I'm not presenting an easy solution, because I'm saying, well, to fix this thing, what you really need to do is, like, fix the fucking political economy and fix inequality, and that's what's going to, like, drain off a lot of this energy, so that we can arrive at so that people just stop freaking out, and the atavistic energy drains down, and we can come to some kind of policy solution.
Jeff, our purpose is to get every conversation to lead to revolution. So this is perfect. This is exactly what we're hoping. We want you to call for revolution.
No, seriously, I was thinking beforehand. I was like, my pithy, crude summation of my thesis here is that if we want open borders, we first have to have socialism. Like, that's basically it.
Atta baby.
Yeah.
Also, atavistic, great word. I think, like,
I don't even
in
know
honor
if I'm
of
using it correctly.
No, it's great. In honor of Rich Jesselson, we should use revanchist as well.
I like revanchist a lot. I love the fact that he
good.
uses that. Yeah.
To your point, Jeff, I would also add that, you sent over this episode of This American Life, which is about immigration in a town in Alabama, and where you really do see this sort of, like, this, like, bottom competition between, like, the white workers in this chicken plant that really feel like that the immigrants are, like, literally coming in and stealing their jobs. And somewhat more remarkably, in the episode, they note that, like, the immigrants won't join the union. that they have there,
which I think is significant. We can get back to that.
Yeah,
but
that's pretty fascinating. Maybe in multiple ways, but I think it's also the case that, you know, like in terms of proximate, like raw politics, like how the DC debate and, you know, so on and so forth went down, and why the Gang of Eight or whatever compromise failed in 2013 was because the right is never ever going to give up immigration as a political issue because it's too convenient as a way of whipping up a frenzy among their base. So it doesn't matter what you do for border enforcement. You could deport every Mexican in the United States, even the citizens, and there would still be Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson on his White Power Hour on Fox News whipping up a frenzy over, you know, there's a brown person in Starbucks and everyone needs to panic and don't look at the top 1% person getting a, you know, massive tax cut or, you know, picking your pocket, basically. It's too convenient for them.
I just want to pause for a second and just say, I always knew Tucker Carlson was an asshole, but like the moral depths to which he has sunk, like since the Trump era began, is astonishing.
Look, you know, I blame Jon Stewart. Do you guys remember when Jon Stewart went on Crossfire like a million years ago?
I remember
and
that.
basically excoriated Tucker Carlson and like Paul Begala or whatever. Yeah. I think that gave Tucker PTSD, and he's never recovered since. But
yeah, but Ryan, I think you're right. They like, to get back to like the whole Polanyi interplay between fascism and capitalism discussion. Like, the right needs immigration as an issue because their fundamental purpose is to protect the oligarchy, and to protect the oligarchy, they need to whip up fear about immigrants. I mean, like. Period. End of discussion.
Immigrants, gays, Muslims, people of color generally, feminists, any group they can other, right?
Yeah. Shall we talk about open borders?
Trigger warning. No, I don't know. Some kind of warning because lefties disagree on this. This is going to be interesting, I think.
Yeah.
Because you have lefties who are clearly in favor of open borders, strange bedfellows with some libertarians who are also in favor of open borders. And then you have, various different defenses of something that's not open border policy. So I think this is an interesting thing to talk about. And see if we can't situate and defend different positions from a principled left position. See if we can do that. Let's. What does the left have to say about this issue, basically?
I could start off. Maybe I could take the plunge here, just to say that, like, I would view this in two ways. Like, do I support open borders in the context of like current political economy, the current organization of human society on this planet? And no, I don't think I do. Would I like to work towards a future where that might be a viable possibility, where people could literally just go wherever they wanted all the time? Yes, definitely, I do think so. But I don't think it's viable in the current, the current moment, either politically or otherwise. In terms of the effects on the United States or the effects on other countries.
So if I can pause you there, you're contrasting the ideal or the philosophically, I guess the philosophically better option would be to have a world in which open borders and free movement of peoples was a reality. But you think at least to get to that reality, even if that's your ideal, in the short term, that can't be the current position that you hold policy-wise for various reasons. Is that right?
Yeah, and maybe like maybe a good example would be to look at the European Union. and the policy of the Schengen area, which does allow basically free movement of people in like most of the countries of the EU. You can go back and forth between each one. You don't need a visa if you're coming from one to the other, and that's really, like, I would say a very worthy and laudable achievement in terms of the, like, that's probably the best part of the EU. A lot of the EU sucks. The euro is a atrocious policy disaster that is, like, you know, one of the cataclysmic economic policy decisions. But the Schengen area, like, that's just like straight up a great achievement of politics. But what it took was, you know, a ton of politics between all those countries, and just like carefully building up and accreting all these treaties one on the other over time, over decades. And, you know, you could say it's like unquestionably is pretty racist that, like, you don't allow any African countries to even be involved in this sort of thing. But, like, I think that is sort of, you know, if you want to have a world in which, like, there is open borders, that sort of process is going to be how you build it up, you know, over time, where, like, you're constructing these sort of, like, institutions in which, like, labor mobility, you know, or human mobility is slowly but surely, like, eroded in a way that it does have, you know, does obtain broad legitimacy within the affected, you know, democratic representations. And if you did it in a way where it's like you just say, you know, back in like 1950 or whatever, and you're Poland or you're Germany or something, and you just say, like, we're going to fiat open borders, and there's, you know, we're not going to try to, like, make this function in any sort of, like, international context, what would happen? Massive influx of people, nativist backlash, policy ends, you know, you've failed. And I think that like, that is, you know, I mean, open borders. I remember when Vox was persecuting Bernie Sanders with the fact that he didn't support open borders, which no U.S. politician does or ever has done, I don't think, for, you know, in the modern context. But I think that would be a very similar process would happen in this country. Like, what if you just said open borders in this country? What would happen? You would have, you know, maybe 50 million people would like jump in the course of, like, a very short period of time. You would have a massive nativist backlash, and the you know, the politics of it would be undermined. And I don't see any way around that, even though, I mean, that's a pretty uncomfortable conclusion. But I don't think that, like, you can get around it. You know, it's not like, I certainly support massively scaling up the current, like, number of people who are allowed in, especially refugees and so forth. But, like, you know, the lots and lots of new people coming in all at the same time really does create political tension. And I think it's like, it's a risky policy. So go ahead.
Okay. A few things I wanted to add on to Ryan's point, where, like, I basically agree, and I wanted to, like, sort of add on a few other things and emphasize a few things. If you look at I guess, you know, the like, reactionary vacuous arguments from conservatives on immigration, I think the way to describe their position is that, you know, there is, you know, society is a social organism, right? Like, we talked about that This American Life episode, where you have, like, how do people on the ground in a particular community to react when people who look different from them, speak a different language, have different cultural practices, whatever, like, come in large numbers. There is and, like, those interactions all at individual communal level scale up to a kind of national, I mean, an ecosystem almost. Like, right, we need to think of this as kind of like a mass organism that is having a very significant environmental stimulus or environmental, like, a burden placed on it by an environment, and it has to, like, figure out how to adapt to it, right? And so the conservative position is just like, you can't ask too much of this organism, right? And we have entered into a period where immigrants as a percentage of the population are quite high. Like, it's about as high as it's ever been, at least going back to like 1850. And so the conservative position is just like, well, we're stressing the social organism too much, and we got to back off. And I think that is true to the extent that, like, it is a social organism and it probably does have limits, right? There are probably limits to what it can take. My beef with the conservatives is, and I kind of touched on this earlier, is that, like, how much the social organism can take in terms of immigration is going to be deeply determined by the political economy. It's going to be deeply determined by, like, how our economy is structured. What do these people encounter when they arrive? Like, do we have the, U.S. Public Housing Authority, meet them at the border and say, great, you want to, like, join America, like, let's find you a place to live. And, the National Job Guarantee System is like, okay, what can we find for you to do where we pay you a living wage and give you benefits and, like, integrate you into, like, the working system and all the rest of it. And we don't have any of that. And of course, like, the immigrants come in and, they know they're under threat. And like we said from that episode, they, like, in that particular case of the This American Life episode, they don't want to join the union because they're scared. Because joining the union means putting them on someone's radar. And because they're illegally, that could put them under threat. So you have this whole system that essentially encourages alienation on both sides. It encourages people already here to feel alienated from the people who just arrived, and vice versa. And that's both a result of, like, the draconianism of our legal immigration system as it exists, but that is also deeply integrated with, like, the exploitative nature of our overall economy. So that is the thing you need. That is the thing that, like, I think the conservatives miss, that, like, drives me nuts, is they don't deal with the political economy at all as, like, something that can change how much the social organism can absorb at one time. Like, we could be able to take open borders with a different political economy. I don't know. I would like to see us run that experiment.
No, I don't think they're missing it, though. I think that's quite intentional.
I mean, right? I'm putting my non-cynical, taking other people in good faith hat on right now.
Well, no, this is a good distinction to make between the results we think are good and then, like, the political tack and rhetoric and ideology we put forth in order to try to achieve something that would be good, right? Because, like, it seems to me, and this is maybe against both of you, and you tell me what you think. I'm thinking akin to, like, prison abolition and, like, the arguments in favor of that. Immediately you get resistance from basically everyone with prison abolition, because what are you going to do with the Charles Mansons? What are you going to do with the murderers, right? And the same thing. Open borders, what the hell? You're going to have 50 million, Coops just said, 50 million people are going to storm the borders, right? But of course, like, the ideological framing is meant to do something politically that doesn't necessarily, like, obviously, if you push for prison abolition, the first thing that happens is not going to be all prisons are, like, erased, right? Like, and if you push for open borders, the first thing that happens isn't going to be actual open borders. So, like, that rhetorical or ideological tack is meant to kind of, like, challenge certain assumptions that feed into, like, countervailing logics that the right loves to take on to. So if you say, like, no, fuck you, right wingers, basically bring everyone in and it'll be fine, you're challenging a certain logic that there's, like, we have so much land. Do you know how many refugees Greece has had? And what the actual, like, land and population ratio is for the refugees they've taken in compared to what we take in? It's absurd. Like, it's like, it would be ridiculous to try to compare and see how many people we'd have to take in to get to that point, right? But, like, so I guess what I'm saying is, how much politically do we need to battle against the right on, like, equal footing, as if they're actually contemplating what's good for us, when they're doing these ridiculous, like, racist arguments to try to just establish their own power and cut off all chance for people to integrate, right? Shouldn't we be trying to push as much as possible for a kind of policy stance that says there is no threat from these others that come in. We should be accommodating as many as possible. That's not actually at the root structurally of the economic precarity. Like, shouldn't we be pushing as much as possible for a narrative that says all the things they're saying make no sense and don't explain at all the problems that people are going through today?
I mean, yes and no. I feel like, I also don't agree with the prison abolition people. I was recently reading an article from 2015 about the hardest prison in Norway, like a maximum security prison for all the most just crazy murderers in Norway.
It's like a dorm room, right?
Yeah, literally, it's like a dorm room. Like they literally have knives like in the kitchen that you use to cook, and like there's TVs in every room that they have, and so on and so forth. And it's just like hell. I want to go there.
Yeah, well, but
pretty nice.
Prison abolition as a political stance might get you there faster.
Yeah, well, the thing is, though, it's still a prison, and it's still the place where they put people who do heinous things, which there are still in Norway, despite being just like a Star Trek utopia in most other circumstances, where like every need is catered for. The state is there for every single possible outcome. Like any minor inconvenience is like, I'm out of Kleenexes. Like, help me, government, and they jump in.
I think once in a while we have to put people in a dorm room. I think that's probably right.
Yeah, right. And so in that case, it's like, so are we saying prison abolition, or is this just kind of like a slogan that's actually not what we really think?
Are you missing my point about the difference between what you push for politically and what that does in terms of political reality?
Well, I think we're talking about like the political usefulness of the utopian demand, right? The way it kind of
exactly, that's right,
breaks open people's thinking. It opens up kind of like the imaginative space and that sort of thing, right?
Exactly, that's right.
The thing I would say is that I think I don't object to Alexi's like idea of like particularly like the idea of open borders as one of those utopian demands that can be useful in exactly that regard. I think that's right. The thing I would say is that when it comes to immigration, I think it really cannot be treated in isolation. And I mean, like, this is true of everything, but I think it is particularly true of immigration. This gets back to like one of the things I wanted to add on to Ryan's earlier point about the Schengen. The Schengen free movement? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Who knows and who cares?
The free movement policy within the EU. It's not just that they had like a big free movement policy within the EU. It's that this free movement was combined with a set of monetary and fiscal overarching monetary and fiscal policies designed to essentially yoke all of the EU countries together in a setup that was inevitably going to create like permanent recessions somewhere. The fiscal monetary policy setup over there is banana. It is basically there to ensure someone is in a Great Depression at all times. So what you are doing when you combine those two things is you are creating with your economic setup the very scarcity that the right wing is then going to blame on your free borders, right? So you are creating you are creating this dynamic that is like, if you had intended to design a dynamic that was going to like just fire up the right-wing nationalists to a degree we have not seen in decades, you would design the EU as it actually exists. So
I definitely do not mean to endorse that aspect of the EU system.
Right.
And I think
you bastard, how dare you, Coops?
The Schengen area I would say is at a severe political risk for exactly those sorts of reasons. I just mean to say that like the way, if you want to build that up, you should do it in a similar fashion, but one which has like more intelligent design and more democracy. However, though, back to your point, Alexi, about utopian demands, I think we've been talking sort of about tactical political objections and just like saying like people won't, they won't agree to this. The politics just won't scan. I think thinking about this internationally, maybe there's a little bit more of a convincing objection, So if, supposing you were to try to solve the political economy problems in the United States and make like a super egalitarian system with like a basically chronic labor shortage that could more or less absorb limitless quantities of immigrants, and you threw open the borders to one degree or another, what would happen to other countries? Well, you would basically suck the wealthiest and the best educated people out of all of those places, like Nigeria, like South Africa, like China and India and Bangladesh and so on and so forth. I mean that's
what Rehan Salam wants, right?
Yeah. We could talk like a long time about like the bullshit language of skills, and we need skills.
No, that's what he wants, and I'm with you, Coops, because I think like clearly this is one of the many topics that kind of implicates the national/international nature of the socialist project, right? Clearly, it's really difficult to do socialism properly unless you get other nation states and other populations on board to doing it with you, and I think that's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I guess I would maybe conclude that these type of free movement is going to be much more feasible in an age in which there is really not any kind of difference between countries in terms of wealth, where it's like people are going to different places because they feel like it, not because like, oh, I'm being massacred over here. I like make 10 times as much money over there.
Yeah. Look, Lenin talked about this, that you guys familiar with the term labor aristocracy? It's this notion that even when the working class in like a first class nation like the United States, the working class deserves to fight for their rights as the working class. But in doing so, what's happening is they're taking advantage in this kind of like global imperialist neoliberal world we live in. They're taking advantage of their aristocracy and position with respect to like third world countries, if you'll forgive the politically incorrect nomenclature. So like ultimately you do what you can where you're at, but you have a position of privilege internationally or globally, even if it's not a position of privilege nationally. And then that's just one of the tricky things we have to contend with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ryan. Okay. Well, I was gonna say, I think Ryan's right that like, if we like designed the like, our utopian egalitarian socialist society here in America, like that would in fact be capable of absorbing vastly more immigrants than we do now. I think that's absolutely right. And I think it's an interesting point that he brings up that like it could destabilize other countries given like who would come and who wouldn't. And I think, you have interesting questions there. Would like America need an outreach program to provide resources to like the working class of the developed world so that they could get over here? Because like the working class of the developing world, so they could get over here, because the upper class of the developing world is precisely who would get drained off the fastest under Ryan's point. And so there is a whole, I think there's a whole lot of, I don't even know how to begin to grapple with that. That is like a whole lot of interesting dynamics that the other thing I was going to say though is I think the way, I mean, but like if we were to achieve like, the socialist utopia here in America, that at least I think would largely take care of the problem of, developed country, developed nations, working classes being hostile to the, lower on the economic totem pole in absolute terms, working class of the developing world, right? Like this whole problem of like working class Americans like being hostile to the working class in China or wherever, and then like, upper class liberals in America tutting the working class in America for not being more open to helping these people abroad. And the way to fix that is like you get a more egalitarian society here at home, and then people don't feel like they're getting fucked over. The other thing,
question for you.
Yeah.
Federal job guarantee, does it apply to non-citizens or just citizens?
My perfect world, it would apply to like, anyone who hit the border, right?
Right.
Like your feet hit American soil. Yeah, sure. We'll give you a job. You want a job?
Boom.
We'll give it to you.
Do it.
I mean, and there's like,
I like it.
There is no, this gets back to what we're talking about. Like in terms of what's the problem? Like, do we not have enough medicine? Do we not have enough food? Do we not have enough building materials to give these people a house? Like in terms of real resources, like concrete fundamental economic reality, there's absolutely nothing stopping us from doing that, from being able to just like take anyone in the second they arrive. What stops it is the fact that we have a monetary economy, and how that money is distributed is based on labor relations and capital ownership and blah, 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 blah. And yeah. And so it's
nonsense. Bunch of nonsense.
The other thing I was going to say, back to Alexi's point about the utopian demand, is that you make the utopian demand for open borders, right? And then people come back at you. Like, they're like, well, what the fuck about jobs? And, what the fuck about the welfare state? What the fuck about wages? You can't, there are, as I just said, I think there are plenty of responses to make to that. Like, I would like a job guarantee that accepts everyone that arrives the moment they get here. That I would like a job guarantee that accepts everyone the moment they arrive. I can't even talk anymore because I've had too much bourbon. But you can't make that argument from the current like center right, center left economic framework. You can't do it. Like that current framework is about enforcing scarcity to make sure that like the owners of capital call the shots in how the economy is designed and run. You cannot make the argument for open borders while you accept the terms of that economic design. The only way to make the case is every time someone comes back at you with one of these questions about how your utopian demand will work, you have to explain to them, all the shit we have been dealing with and we have been told about how we have to live under capitalism, or at least American-style capitalism, is bullshit. Like it will immediately bring you into that next argument. You will not be able to avoid it. And I think one of the problems we have had is that a lot of the pro-immigration forces in American politics right now try very hard to make the case for like open borders, or the movement towards open borders, from the neoliberal position. Like,
that's right.
This is the EU problem. This is this is what happened in the European Union, is they try to combine the two. It's what we do in America. We try to combine the two.
They try to avoid that fundamental problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work, like the one thing I love seeing is like you have all these well-meaning like center left reporters who like want to make the case for more immigration. So they talk to business leaders and they keep writing stories about how like we need more immigration to solve labor shortages. And I'm just like, dude, labor shortages are what raise wages. So you are literally arguing we need more immigrants to hold workers' wages down. You are making the rights argument for it. It's bananas. Anyway, that's
Imagine getting that idea from talking to a bunch of CEOs.
Right.
They're it's like there's the world's most good faith arguers is the business class, the leaders of major corporations.
Yes, indeed. They've got the common good really at heart.
So that's what I had. I don't know who's got something else.
So should we transition to because again, all of this debate that we're having, even amongst our differences, has nothing to do with the migrant caravan. Like we can assimilate
caravan, I would say.
What did I say? Migrant? Sorry, the refugee caravan. The 7,000-ish number of refugees seeking asylum could be assimilated without anyone noticing, literally at all.
Oh yeah.
And this kind of goes to Ryan's point, but it's a sideshow, right? Like in terms of refugees and asylum, and how few, for example, we've been taken from Syria, let alone from South and Latin America. When it comes to people that are displaced or stateless, and there's different definitions of those things, the moral and political way that we interpret that is important, and not at all, I have to say, implicating these broader questions of what can we sustain as a country. Like literally, there's no existential threat to us at all when it comes to asylum seekers. Can we agree on that and kind of put that to bed at least?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, this I would say with regard to the particularly refugees coming from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. I would say if I were in charge of the United States, absolutely the number one priority should just be like anybody who gets in, anybody who comes to the border gets taken in. But I think just behind that would be to try to solve the or help solve the, terrible political violence that is happening in those three countries, which I would say is, number one, driven largely by fighting over control over the access to the drug trade to the United States. And number two has been exacerbated by U.S. foreign policy saying that what you should do with drug gangs is sick the military on them because that will work. We've been doing that since like 2006 because it kind of had a sort of quasi impact in Colombia. But, the result everywhere else, the Colombian thing was like a very one-off sort of like idiosyncratic thing. The result everywhere else is like you smash one cartel, you create two cartels who are fighting each other and the government and, just like butchering the rest of the population, fighting to maintain a monopoly over the trade supply. And so the upshot is like you could do a lot of things, I would guess presumably that a lot, like many, if not most of these refugees would rather not leave their home place, would rather stay where they're born and where their family and their friends live. And to the extent to which the U.S. through its foreign policy could stop the just fucking apocalyptic violence in that area of Central America from happening by legalizing drugs, not for commercial sale within the United States, and by saying, we should scale back the use of the military and have a more intelligent response to organized crime in these places, and try to press that idea on those governments. I think that would be a great idea too. And sort of in the spirit of saying the idea is not to just suck the entire population of the planet into the United States, so that you should make it so that anybody anywhere can live, the true utopian demand, anybody anywhere on the entire planet can live a decent life without exception. Doesn't matter where you are.
I like that.
Yeah.
I agree with Ren. I find that to be a very compelling point. Just a lot of these refugee situations are created because America goes out into the world and breaks shit, and we should stop breaking shit. I find
it's like the United States is a little toddler of a rich family that gets to break a bunch of shit in someone else's home, and it doesn't matter because you can't say anything because it's a rich kid's baby.
Right.
And I
find that to be a compelling point, and I think that's at least a good starting point to have one-on-one arguments with people who are worried about immigration or worried about the refugee caravan or anything like that. The other thing I was going to say was, you could also add NAFTA to this list. A million Mexican farmers lose their livelihoods in the 1990s, and then all come flooding to America. Surprise, surprise. So stop breaking shit, America. The other thing, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh yeah, I think the refugee caravan in and of itself. I mean, like we said, the right wing requires these issues to drum up in order to politically and optically defend the oligarchy. And this is raw opportunism. That is why the refugee caravan is on our news screens, is because the Trump administration is engaging in raw political opportunism And, the media, the news media, of which I'm a member, and this is how it works. Like, the news media works on an advertising model, so it needs those clicks, it needs those views. That's how it gets its money and makes its profits. And so this is the news. Trump freaking out about the caravan is the news. So they report on it, it gets the clicks, and everybody is now talking about a caravan of 7,000 people that, as Alexi said, we could absorb into our society and economy without a blip.
And can I just say, first of all, everyone Google Spross and click all the clicks so that he gets some advertising revenue or whatever. But secondly, as the theorist here, I want to bring in Hannah Arendt just for a moment because it seems like we should. Why not? And she talks about when you're thinking like philosophically and morally about, it seems so clear that whatever our capacity is as a nation, we need a defense against the right wing kind of othering of people of color and people from South and Central America. What do you say? What philosophically, theoretically do you say in support of the right for these people seeking asylum, seeking, refugee status? And so I think Arendt, of course, as a German Jew who fled Germany amidst the Holocaust and found a place in this country, both personally and philosophically, was disposed to seek to underpin the advocation for those seeking asylum philosophically in a way that I think will help us. And she spoke of the right to have rights, and the fact that I think we can all recognize, like, any rights or human rights that people actually have are always and everywhere situated within a particular political community, usually a nation state. And so, like, people who are fleeing or have been stripped of their citizenship or are otherwise displaced have the most fundamental of human rights that like beg for a duty or obligation of others to take care of. And that is that even worse than being oppressed is not even having the right to be oppressed, not even being a part of a political community in which you can be given freedom or be enslaved. And so she writes in, in the origins of totalitarianism, she says that the right to have rights, or the right of every individual to belong to humanity, should be guaranteed by humanity itself. And then she also adds, it is by no means certain whether this is possible. But she is very, very clear on the fact that fundamentally, the most basic right that any human being has by virtue of being human is the right to be in a polis, in a political community, the right to have rights. And then you can adjudicate within that community who gets what and why. But like that stateless character that people have because of circumstance should never be permitted, especially in a globalized world like we have now.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, reading that bit of Arendt, I had, I guess, my kind of, you think about rights and you think about like, where do they come from? And I guess she kind of gets into this a little bit, and she's talking about the Declaration of the Rights of Man and so forth, and the Declaration of Independence, and you're talking about things that are self-evident. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. Blah blah blah. And that's just like it's just not terribly convincing. And as a sort of empirical fact, is definitely not true. All men are not created equal in terms of.
What do you mean by that? So like let me as the theorist, let me jump in immediately. Like, no one is treated that way, but that's not
what I mean.
Oh, that's what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like when they say are created equal means by their nature, by the very humanity in which we all participate, we are owed by our nature equal treatment. Now, whether we receive that or not is an empirical or descriptive fact.
And I guess I would say that, like, you know, I mean, I think that is a laudable normative goal to say that everyone is like an equal member of a you know, everyone should be treated equally and across the whole, you know, swath of humanity.
Right.
I think that it's not the case, and this never has been the case. And I think that, like, you know, to say that, like, you know, people are entitled to, people have inalienable rights and so on, like that type of language tends to obscure how people come to be treated equally, which is by virtue of being a member of a political community which can ensure that that people are treated equally. And, like, whether, you know, a right being inalienable is kind of just nonsensical. It doesn't, it's an, I mean, I guess as a sort of normative claim, it makes sense, but, like, it's not true that you can.
No, but that's the point. That's the point, Ryan. Like, the point is that because normatively it should be the case, that should be the argument to force actual political entities to make it the case.
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, insofar as you're just making a normative claim to say that
I'm the fucking theorist. That's what I'm doing.
I think that yeah, normative claims, rights discourse is just fine. I think that it tends to be a little bit obscurantist. It tends to lead people astray, in so far as they tend to think of rights as existing before politics, you know, as
That's
like being inherent in themselves.
I think that's Arendt is seeking to do the opposite, actually. I think she's trying to show that unless, as a nation state or a political community, you actually make real, right, the actual civil political rights that you have in that community, then these people who you might otherwise say, yes, they have these human rights normatively, philosophically, right, they won't actually be experiencing that at all. So I think you and Arendt would agree in a way. This is supposed to be pressure upon a political community to realize that it's incumbent upon us to actualize these things that we say are philosophically real.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the big question is, like, how you build, like, I talked about society before as a social organism, and I think it's like, how do you create a social organism that is willing to put those rights into practice, right? That does not rebel against them, that, you know, does not feel internally like it is being threatened by the demand to put those rights into practice, which gets us back to all, like, you know, the political economy and equality and all the other questions we've been dealing with. I think
so. Yeah.
I would say, like, I the one thing that I struggle with is, like, I mean, like, I agree with Arendt's, like, overall, like, normative claim. Like, I don't know if, like, you go to, like, you know, the person in the street or the person in small town Texas and say to them, well, like, you know, Hannah Arendt, like, said A, B, and C about, like, you know, the right to have rights. Like, you know,
it works for me, man. It works for me. Okay?
I know. But, like, you know, with them, like, I think I mean, there's any number of, like, moral and political traditions you can draw from, like, you know, religion to history to previous movements, like, things that they may, like, have invested, like, have emotional investment in, that kind of thing. I guess I would think the key is, like, one thing I remember Reihan Salam complaining about was the fact, like, you know, when President Obama signed DACA, right? A relatively modest, middling improvement on immigration policy in the grand scheme of things. But he defends it in this soaring rhetoric about how we must always welcome the stranger. And so Salam gets
Typical.
like, you know, annoyed that he's like, well, he's like, say what, Ryan?
Typical.
Right. So Salam gets annoyed. He's like, he's making this like very like contingent, limited, like prudential policy arrangement, but he's defending it in these grand sweeping moral terms. So if you're not on board with his particular prudential balancing of all these issues, well, then you're just an asshole, right? But I think, to build like every utopian demand starts as like a middling policy step. And then one middling policy step becomes another middling policy step. And so you need the soaring rhetoric, the soaring utopian demand at the end of that to indicate where you're going. The trick, I think, like I said before, is you have to be honest about the implications of what you're demanding, which gets us back to the fact like, okay, if we do ultimately want to come to a place where we are a polity that instantiates the right to have rights, or we are a polity that always welcomes the stranger, what kind of internal relations do we have to have? What kind of internal economic relations do we have to have? What kind of internal political relations do we have to have? And you have to like talk openly about those questions. And because like that one utopian demand of being a polity that always provides everyone the right to have rights is going to then encompass and require other utopian demands that will build upon that. And you're going to have to be honest about all of those, which gets me back to the problem that like, the defenders of that one utopian demand have not been willing to take on the other utopian demands that are implicated.
Yeah. And Ryan, look, I'm going to agree also that like nation states, generally speaking, have a normal friend-enemy distinction that they make, and like political communities, even going back to Aristotle, have this notion that like flourishing in the community involves a like delimited, circumscribed community. Of course, that's usually demarcated by some like ethno-historical demographic group, whereas we have this special experiment that's basically built on immigration, and so it's kind of a bizarre thing where it's hard to say, no, this is what, right, like American is, like this is what America means. And Trump, of course, and his posse, if you will, I want to call them a posse, are trying to do the Make America White Again thing, where America means, white America, and is specifically trying to frame the friend-enemy distinction in those ethno-national terms, which is extremely dangerous and troubling. And so it's all the more problematic, right? Because we have a vast land with 325 million people or whatever. And all the more strange with like the most powerful, wealthy country in the world attempting to make this very classical distinction between us and other, right? So it's kind of a unique, like, look, I'm Greek American. So like the fact that Greece has a small piece, a land the size of Georgia with like 10 million people. And if it suddenly had, 10 million people flooding in from Asia, I would be like, wow, that's probably going to wipe out the total like history of Greece as I know it. And that's going to totally change. That might be a rational fear I have. Like, oh, that would be kind of sad to see my homeland totally overrun and changed in every single way, like culturally, demographically, etc. But in the country like we have, that's pluralistic as its like very foundation, that has so much land, it has so many people, it is just like a total bullshit narrative by the right, that seeks to undo an otherwise important civic nationalism based on philosophy of granting rights to any willing to enter on the recognition of those values and principles. And so it just seems dangerous to me to kind of cede any ground to those that would seek to push against the other in that way.
Yeah, well, I guess, I don't know, as a concluding comment, like open borders is not going to be on any kind of
platform.
Yeah, well, like up for a congressional vote at any time soon. And I certainly would say, that when it comes to like other concrete policy too, how many refugees are we going to take in? It was like Trump's taking in like 10 people this year. that we should be doing. I think in the Obama years it was like 80,000, 90,000 refugees per year. Like I think we could do 10 times that many without even a blinking. But I guess I would situate my policy in terms of like trying to secure material prosperity across the entire planet. And
exactly. Amen.
And accepting the need for like lots and lots of people to move across places whenever there's like a sort of localized disaster or hurricane or so forth, but at the same time not
fucking stop the neoliberal policies that give rise to all these destabilizing geopolitical situations, right?
Like climate change. Number one.
Climate change.
I mean, probably, you're talking about refugees. That's probably the number one thing. I mean, the Yemen thing is definitely exacerbated by climate change. They got no water, and also in the Sudan, both of those countries. And yeah, so I guess I would say like it's kind of a difficult needle to thread, but like the way I would place it is that like all rich countries have an obligation to take in as many immigrants and refugees as is like sort of practicable, and at the same time using their foreign policy to push against the forces that shove people out of their home countries, to make it such that if people are, the ideal world I think we want to live in is one in which people come because they're like interested and they're like, I want to come visit and I want to see the people and I want to like look at the national parks and stuff, and not like I'm going to be butchered by ISIS. Like that is what we should try to create over time. It's not going to be easy, but I think that like, if we're looking at the kind of Federation Star Trek world of Earth, that's what, to slowly dissolve the nation state away, to have a place where there's no borders. That's what it would look like.
Should I have some kind of
yes,
thought?
yes,
Okay.
You should.
Well, I think I come back to like my, just my point about like, I do think the conservatives are right in the sense of like society is an organism, and as an organism, it has certain, limits or parameters or abilities and limits to those abilities. But like, as I already said, how that organism is constituted in terms of its economic structure and its political economy and everything else is like can vastly change those abilities. So I think the demand, the utopian demand for open borders, is like laudable and should be made, but it has to be done with an acknowledgement of like the nature of the social organism and what other utopian demands are necessary so that this particular utopian demand of open borders does not cause a social organism to like freak the fuck out. Because I think, like we said, as with the European Union, we have like a demonstrated case that like the utopian demand, that one utopian demand of open borders, if combined with like the wrong circumstances, leads to really terrible shit.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So like, just like, that one utopian demand has to be made in an honest reckoning with the other utopian demands that are implicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I guess,
because
yeah.
that's
and
right.
so
That's
I come
good.
back. If you want open borders, you have to advocate for socialism. Like I come back to
Atta baby. That's right. Like, just hear me out, man. Open borders work if you listen to my whole scheme, and the thing you think is the problem with immigration is not the problem because you're missing the structural picture. So let's
right, yeah.
let's take. Yeah.
Yeah, the scarcity that people like blame on immigration is created by neoliberalism. If we want to be pithy, I mean that's the situation. And so like you don't want to like create the conditions that validate their narrative.
Yeah, any opportunity to disabuse people of that false narrative is a good opportunity to take, and use that opening to slam in the most idealistic project that socialism can offer. So let's do that too.
Good. Yeah. I think that's a good place to stop.
All right.
Nice. Well, thank you, Spross, for joining the fun.
Yeah,
it's always a pleasure.
Did I do well? I don't know.
I think so. The listeners will tell us. They always do.
Anyway, thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll never bring Spross on again.
Oh, God.
Give us all your opinions. Tell us how it went. Judge Spross eternally. And rate us on iTunes. Give us the 5 stars. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.